The unexpected stop. It was a clear and sunny afternoon in the small town of Silverwood, Pennsylvania. Nestled among rolling hills, Silverwood had the charm of a place where everyone knew each other, where the streets were lined with old brick buildings and flowering dogwoods, and where neighbors greeted each other with a smile and a wave. Special Agent Kara Thompson of the FBI was finishing a grueling week. She had been deep in an undercover operation that was draining both mentally and emotionally. Her case had involved infiltrating a local trafficking ring, where trust was precarious and mistakes were unforgivable. She was exhausted, craving the solitude of her quiet home, her favorite jazz playlist, and perhaps even a glass of wine. As she drove down Main Street, Kara rolled down her window to let the warm breeze flow through her car. The fresh air was like a balm, soothing the tension that had built up in her shoulders and back. People filled the sidewalks, laughing, shopping, and carrying on with their lives, blissfully unaware of the shadows lurking in their seemingly peaceful town. Kara took a deep breath, savoring the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from the corner bakery, the sound of children playing in the park nearby, and the comforting familiarity of her surroundings. Suddenly, her rearview mirror lit up with flashing red and blue lights. The familiar whine of a police siren cut through the music, and Kara's peaceful moment shattered. Her heart skipped a beat as she glanced in the mirror. There was a police car directly behind her, its lights flashing insistently. Confused, she glanced at her speedometer. She hadn't been speeding, and her driving record was spotless. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong, and carefully pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down her window as she waited for the officers to approach. She watched as two police officers emerged from the squad car. Officer Michael Anders, a tall, rugged man with a stern expression, approached her driver's side window while his partner, Officer Jake Lawson, stayed back, scrutinizing her car with a suspicious glance. Kara's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure, her hands resting visibly on the steering wheel as Officer Anders leaned down to peer into her window. "License and registration, please," he requested sharply, his tone colder than she had expected. Kara nodded, reaching into her glove compartment for her documents, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, handing him her license and registration with a calm smile. Anders didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took her documents and stepped back to speak with his partner in low tones. Kara couldn't make out their words, but their body language was unmistakable. Something was off. She could see Lawson casting her sidelong glances, as if trying to size her up. The uneasy knot in her stomach tightened, and a flicker of irritation sparked in her chest. This wasn't the simple traffic stop. Something else was going on. After what felt like an eternity, Anders returned, his expression unreadable. "Please step out of the vehicle, Mom," he ordered, his tone as curt as before. Kara's heart sank, but she complied, carefully unfastening her seatbelt and stepping out of the car. She knew better than to argue or make any sudden movements that could escalate the situation. As she exited, Anders and Lawson watched her intently, their gazes critical and wary. It was then that she noticed the subtle hostility in their eyes. They weren't just doing a routine check. They were judging her, making assumptions based on something other than her driving record. "We received reports of a vehicle matching yours involved in suspicious activity," Anders said, though his words were vague, offering no real explanation. Kara's mind raced, wondering if her cover had somehow been compromised or if someone from her case had identified her. She took a steadying breath and spoke with measured confidence. "I'm an FBI agent," she said, reaching into her jacket pocket to retrieve her badge. She held it up for them to see, hoping it would clarify things and end this unnecessary tension. But instead of de-escalating, her declaration seemed to provoke something in the officers. Lawson smirked, crossing his arms as he leaned against the side of her car. "FBI? Huh?" He sneered as though doubting her claim. "You'll understand then, Agent Thompson, that we have protocols to follow. You can never be too careful, especially with certain types." Kara clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm, even as anger bubbled beneath her composed exterior. She could see now that this was more than a routine check. This was about their presumptions, a judgment passed on her based on appearance and stereotypes, rather than any actual wrongdoing. But she remained resolute, her hands relaxed at her sides as she met their eyes calmly. As they continued their inspection, she noticed pedestrians beginning to slow down, casting curious glances her way. A few even stopped, their phones out, recording the scene with a mixture of concern and intrigue. The sight of people watching seemed to make Anders uneasy. His confidence faltered momentarily, and his partner, Lawson, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of public scrutiny. But Anders quickly masked his hesitation, his voice rising as he tried to reassert his authority. "Cooperate fully, Agent Thompson, or this will lead to consequences," he warned, his tone tight with forced authority. Kara took a slow, deep breath, willing herself to remain calm. This was her moment to stand up for herself. She reached back into her jacket, this time pulling out her badge with deliberate care, holding it out for everyone to see. "Special Agent Kara Thompson, FBI," she announced firmly. "I suggest you end this stop now and explain why you pulled me over without any reasonable cause." Her words landed with a visible impact. Anders' face paled as the realization set in, his earlier bravado replaced by an unmistakable hint of fear. Lawson took a step back, visibly shaken, as he realized they had been harassing a federal agent, someone with the authority to report their misconduct. The two officers exchanged panicked glances, their confidence crumbling as the eyes of the onlookers bore down on them, silent witnesses to their actions. I didn't realize," Anders stammered, trying to regain his composure, though his voice betrayed his unease. "Didn't realize what?" Kara pressed, her voice steady and unyielding. "That you were stopping someone based solely on appearance, or that you'd face consequences for it." The murmurs among the crowd grew louder, their judgment weighing on the officers like a lead weight. Anders' hands shook slightly as he glanced around, his face flushed with embarrassment, while Lawson shifted his gaze to the ground, unwilling to meet her eyes. Anders finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. We're sorry, ma'am, for the inconvenience." Kara nodded, accepting their apology, but she wasn't finished. "This won't go unnoticed," she said, her tone carrying a weight of determination that left both officers visibly unsettled. "Expect a formal investigation into your conduct." With that, she turned and walked back to her car, her steps measured and dignified. She could feel the weight of the crowd's gaze on her, their silent approval a testament to the stand she had taken. She slid back into her car, her heart pounding but her mind clear. This wasn't just about her. It was about the countless others who faced similar prejudice without the power to challenge it. She had made her point, but she knew this was only the beginning. As she drove away, leaving the two officers grappling with their shame, Kara resolved to take action. She would report this incident, not only to hold them accountable, but to shine a light on the biases and injustices that festered within the system. She had faced this encounter with courage, but she knew the road to true justice was long, and she was prepared to see it through to the end. The fallout. Kara Thompson arrived at the FBI office the following morning with a renewed sense of purpose. She'd spent the previous evening replaying the traffic stop in her mind. Every word, every sneer, every ounce of disrespect etched into her memory. Though she'd stayed composed in the moment, the lingering sting of injustice had kept her awake, fueling her resolve to make sure those officers faced real consequences. The incident wasn't just an isolated insult to her. It was a reminder of the biases and assumptions that harmed countless individuals, often without the shield of an FBI badge to protect them. As Kara made her way through the bustling halls of the Silverwood branch, she noticed a few of her colleagues glancing her way, murmuring in hushed voices. News of the encounter had already begun to circulate, and support poured in from fellow agents who understood the weight of what she had faced. Some had been her partners in the field, seeing firsthand how perceptions and prejudices could shape the way people were treated. A few patted her on the back as she passed, nodding in quiet solidarity, a silent reminder that she was far from alone in this fight. Entering her office, Kara sat at her desk and began drafting her report. She chose her words carefully, making sure to capture every detail, each unjustified demand, each disrespectful glance, every single instance of misconduct that had marred her experience. She wrote with a mixture of calm and precision, determined to document everything with accuracy. This wasn't just about her. It was about setting a precedent, about making a stand for herself and others. Each word she typed held the weight of her conviction. Just as she finished the last line, her supervisor, Special Agent John Delgado, knocked on her door and stepped inside. Delgado was a tall man in his late 40s, with a quiet strength that had earned him respect among his peers. He had always been a mentor to Kara, guiding her through the ups and downs of her career with steady support and wisdom. Kara, he greeted her with a warm yet serious expression. "I heard about what happened. Are you all right?" Kara looked up, momentarily caught off guard by his presence, but she appreciated his concern. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady. It was infuriating, to say the least. They didn't just see me as a driver or even a fellow officer of the law. They saw me as a target. They assumed guilt because I didn't look like what they expected. Delgado nodded, his face reflecting a mix of understanding and quiet anger. It takes a lot of courage to handle something like that with such dignity, and even more to report it. Just know, the Bureau stands behind you on this. We'll make sure your report is heard. Kara's expression softened. "Thank you, sir. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. If we're dedicated to justice, then it has to apply to everyone, not just to those who fit a particular image." Delgado's eyes held a look of pride as he nodded, his respect for Kara evident. "We'll take this as far as it needs to go, Kara. The community deserves officers they can trust, and the department needs to be reminded that they're accountable to the people they serve." With a grateful smile, Kara handed Delgado her report. As he left, she felt a surge of determination swell within her. This was her moment to bring about change, however incremental. She could almost feel the weight lifting as she saw her words taking shape, her actions sowing the seeds of justice. But across town, at the Silverwood Police Department, the atmosphere was a far cry from supportive. News of Kara's report had quickly spread through the precinct, unsettling more than just Officers Anders and Lawson. The report had triggered an internal investigation, and it was clear that this was no minor complaint. The Bureau's involvement meant that the consequences could be significant, possibly even career-threatening. Officers Anders and Lawson sat in the waiting room outside Chief Roger Milligan's office, feeling the sting of judgment from their colleagues. Their usual confidence was nowhere to be found. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with everyone who passed. Though they tried to downplay the situation as a misunderstanding, the truth was evident in their uneasy silence. Their meeting with Chief Milligan was tense. The chief, a man known for his principles and his insistence on transparency, had always held a firm stance on ethical conduct. He was well respected in Silverwood, known as someone who valued integrity over image, but this situation was testing his patience. "Officers, do you understand the gravity of this situation?" Milligan's voice was measured but laced with disappointment. "An FBI agent has filed a formal complaint against you, citing misconduct. This isn't just about a traffic stop. It's about the reputation of this department and the trust we hold with the community." Anders looked away, his confidence crumbling under the chief's scrutiny, while Lawson stammered, "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. We didn't realize who she was." Chief Milligan's gaze hardened. "Didn't realize who she was? That's not the point, Officer Lawson. You're supposed to serve everyone with the same respect, whether they're an agent, a civilian, or anyone else. And what's even more concerning is that she believes you targeted her based on her appearance. Do you understand how serious that allegation is?" The two officers exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of their situation sinking in as the chief's words cut through their last remnants of denial. There was no easy way out. They had misjudged and mistreated an FBI agent, and they were about to face the consequences. Meanwhile, Kara's report had set off a ripple effect within the FBI as well. Colleagues who had faced similar instances of prejudice reached out to her, expressing their support and sharing their own experiences. She found solace in their stories, knowing she wasn't alone, that this fight was part of a larger struggle against the prejudices that still permeated law enforcement. At the end of the day, Kara received a message from Chief Milligan himself, requesting a face-to-face meeting. She agreed, though part of her was wary of how this would go. The chief was known to be a fair man, but she knew that reputations were only half of the picture. The meeting took place in Chief Milligan's office, an unpretentious space filled with certificates, plaques, and photographs from community events. The chief greeted Kara with a respectful nod as he gestured for her to take a seat across from him. "Agent Thompson," he began, his tone calm but serious. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to speak with you directly about the incident and the steps we're taking in response." Kara met his gaze, her own expression resolute. "I appreciate that, Chief Milligan. This isn't just about me, though. It's about setting a precedent. If this type of conduct goes unchecked, it sends a message to the community, and it's not one of safety or respect." Milligan nodded, a hint of weariness in his eyes. "I agree. This department has a duty to serve everyone with fairness and integrity. As part of the investigation, Officers Anders and Lawson have been suspended without pay and will undergo mandatory retraining. Additionally, we're implementing a department-wide program on bias and ethics." Kara listened, her face impassive, though she appreciated the speed with which the chief was addressing the issue. "I hope that this program leads to real change, Chief," she said. "Retraining is a good first step, but if the underlying biases aren't addressed, then incidents like this will continue." Chief Milligan exhaled, his face etched with a look of resolve. "You're absolutely right, Agent Thompson. We've taken this as a wake-up call, not just for those officers but for the entire department. We'll be working with community leaders and external consultants to ensure these measures are not just symbolic." Satisfied but cautious, Kara nodded. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate your commitment to addressing this. But I'll be watching closely. I need to know that these actions will have a lasting impact, not just on paper but in practice." Their conversation ended on a note of mutual respect, but Kara knew the journey was far from over. She left the station feeling a mix of cautious optimism and lingering wariness, fully aware that promises were often easy to make but harder to keep. As days passed, the fallout from the incident rippled through Silverwood. The local news caught wind of the story, sparking a surge of public interest. Headlines painted it as a test of accountability within the police department, and citizens of Silverwood weighed in, sharing their own concerns about law enforcement conduct. The community reaction was mixed. Some applauded the actions taken, seeing them as a step toward accountability, while others criticized the punishment as insufficient. Community members held discussions, even organizing a town hall meeting to voice their concerns and demand more transparency in policing practices. Kara watched the events unfold from her office, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She hadn't anticipated becoming the face of this movement, yet here she was, the focal point of a much-needed conversation about fairness and respect within the justice system. One morning, she received a call from her supervisor, Special Agent Delgado. "Kara, the media wants to interview you. I know this isn't what you signed up for, but your story could add weight to the conversation. It's entirely your choice." After a moment's hesitation, Kara agreed. She realized that sharing her experience publicly could amplify the message she had been trying to convey. This wasn't just about a single incident. It was about challenging a flawed system, and she was ready to make her voice heard. The next step would be her most challenging yet, as she prepared to step into the spotlight and face the scrutiny of both supporters and skeptics alike. Standing in the spotlight, Kara hadn't expected the amount of public interest her story would generate. What had started as an unjust traffic stop had quickly snowballed into a town-wide controversy, putting a spotlight on Silverwood's police department. The community's reaction had been intense. Some were deeply concerned about bias in law enforcement, while others were skeptical, even defensive, questioning if the situation was being blown out of proportion. But Kara's goal wasn't to create division. She wanted accountability, not just for herself, but for everyone who had faced unjust treatment. As she prepared for her interview with a local news station, Kara felt a mix of determination and vulnerability. She had spent her career working in the shadows, uncovering secrets and rooting out criminals. She was used to danger, to the thrill of undercover work, and to the silent satisfaction of seeing justice served. But standing in front of a camera, sharing a personal story for public scrutiny, was uncharted territory. The interview was set in a small studio that doubled as the station's main office. Kara arrived early, dressed in a crisp navy suit, her FBI badge tucked away but visible enough to remind the public of her role and commitment. She was met by Linda Dawson, the local reporter known for her empathy and fairness. Linda had been covering Silverwood's stories for over a decade, and she understood the delicate nature of Kara's situation. "Agent Thompson, thank you for agreeing to do this," Linda said warmly as she shook Kara's hand. "I know this isn't easy, but your story could make a real difference." Kara nodded, grateful for Linda's gentle approach. "Thank you, Linda. I just want to help people understand that this isn't about punishing two officers. It's about preventing others from experiencing the same treatment." They sat down under the bright studio lights, with cameras positioned around them. Linda introduced Kara to the viewers, summarizing the situation and explaining the significance of the complaint that had triggered a formal investigation. Then she turned to Kara, her expression serious yet supportive. "Kara," Linda began, using her first name to make the conversation feel more personal, "could you walk us through what happened that day?" Kara took a steadying breath, glancing down momentarily to gather her thoughts before meeting Linda's gaze. "It was a typical day for me," she began. "I just finished an undercover case, and I was on my way home, ready to unwind after weeks of stressful work. But as I was driving down Main Street, I noticed a police car following me. I didn't think much of it at first. I have a clean record. I wasn't speeding. There was no reason to believe I'd done anything wrong." She paused, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of conviction. But then the lights came on, and the siren. They pulled me over. When the officers approached my car, their demeanor wasn't one of a routine stop. There was an edge to it, a suspicion. They looked at me as though I was a threat, not a law-abiding citizen. Linda leaned in, her expression encouraging. "What went through your mind in that moment?" "I was shocked," Kara admitted. "I had worked alongside law enforcement for years, even shared cases with local officers. But here I was, being treated like a suspect in my own town, my own community, based solely on assumptions they'd made about me. And when I revealed I was an FBI agent, I thought that would de-escalate things. But instead, it seemed to make them even more hostile." The audience could feel the tension in Kara's words, her measured voice revealing the frustration and hurt she had felt in that moment. Linda gave her a respectful nod before asking, "And how did the situation resolve?" Kara's gaze grew intense, her posture straightening. "It took standing my ground. I had to insist that they acknowledge who I was and why this stop was unjustified. I had to remind them of their duty to serve everyone fairly. Eventually, when they realized they couldn't ignore my badge, they backed down. But it shouldn't have taken that. No one should have to justify their rights or fight to be treated with respect." Linda gave Kara a moment to let her words sink in before continuing. "Agent Thompson, this incident has sparked a lot of conversation in Silverwood about policing, bias, and accountability. What do you hope comes from sharing your story?" Kara's voice softened but held a note of determination. "I hope it leads to real change. This isn't about making enemies or demonizing law enforcement. It's about addressing the biases that exist, whether we like it or not. Everyone deserves to feel safe, to feel respected, no matter who they are or what they look like. As the interview concluded, Linda thanked Kara and expressed her hope that Silverwood would take her words to heart. The broadcast went live later that evening, reaching households all over town. Kara's words sparked reactions from every corner of the community. Families, business owners, students, and retirees alike found themselves confronting their own perspectives on the role of police and the impact of bias in their community. In the days that followed, Kara's story continued to ripple through Silverwood. Social media erupted with discussions, both supportive and critical, with people debating the significance of her experience. Some hailed her as a hero for standing up against injustice, while others questioned if she had overreacted, claiming that mistakes happen, and not all cops are bad. But despite the mix of reactions, Kara knew one thing. Her story had opened up a long overdue conversation. Meanwhile, at the Silverwood Police Department, the mood was tense. Officers Anders and Lawson were both under suspension, and their absence had created an uncomfortable silence in the precinct. Their colleagues avoided discussing the investigation openly, but whispers spread in the break rooms, during roll call, and even among higher-ups. The reality of the investigation weighed on everyone. Chief Milligan took swift action to implement new training protocols. He invited diversity and bias consultants to lead workshops, mandating that every officer attend, from rookies to veterans. The training sessions included not only lectures but also discussions, role-playing exercises, and case studies. Officers were challenged to confront their assumptions, question their reactions, and explore the ways that implicit bias could affect their actions. The training wasn't easy. Many officers resisted, feeling targeted and defensive. Some felt that the entire department was being painted with the same brush, as though they were all guilty of the actions of a few. But as the sessions progressed, some of the resistance softened, and genuine reflection began to take place. Officers who had never considered the impact of their biases found themselves re-examining past encounters, questioning how they might have acted differently. At one of the final sessions, Chief Milligan addressed the department personally. Standing before his officers, he acknowledged the discomfort of the situation, but emphasized the importance of growth and accountability. "We're here because we serve this community," he said, his voice carrying through the room with quiet strength. "And that means holding ourselves to the highest standard. Mistakes don't define us. How we respond to them does. I know this has been a challenging time for all of us, but I believe that if we're willing to learn from this, we can become stronger, better, and more trusted by the people we protect." Across town, Kara was beginning to see the impact of her actions on a larger scale. Community leaders reached out to her, inviting her to speak at forums and town hall meetings. Though public speaking had never been her forte, Kara accepted, recognizing the importance of sharing her story beyond just a single interview. Each time she spoke, she was met with a mix of emotions from the audience: sympathy, anger, hope, and a shared determination to bring about meaningful change. During one town hall meeting, a young woman approached Kara afterward, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Agent Thompson," she said softly. "My little brother had a similar experience last year, but we were too afraid to say anything. Seeing you stand up, it gives us hope." Kara's heart swelled with empathy. She realized her story wasn't just about her. It was a symbol, a rallying point for others who had felt silenced and overlooked. With each conversation, she felt her purpose solidify, her commitment to justice deepening. She was no longer just an agent fighting a personal battle. She had become part of a larger movement, one that reached far beyond Silverwood. As the investigation concluded, Chief Milligan announced that Officers Anders and Lawson would be reassigned following their retraining, with conditions placed on their duties to ensure continued accountability. While some in the community felt the punishment was too lenient, others viewed it as a balanced approach, allowing room for growth and redemption, while ensuring that justice was served. For Kara, it was a bittersweet victory. She knew that real change would take time. that there was still much work to be done. But seeing the community come together, seeing people stand up and speak out, gave her hope. She had sparked something much bigger than she had ever anticipated, and she was ready to keep fighting, knowing that her story was only the beginning. As Silverwood began to heal, a newfound sense of unity took hold. People began to see each other not as strangers or stereotypes, but as neighbors, each deserving of respect and dignity. And Kara, though tired from the journey, felt a quiet pride. She had stood her ground, faced her fears, and reminded her community of the true meaning of justice. The experience had changed her, just as it had changed Silverwood. The echoes of change. Kara Thompson had always believed in the power of justice, but she never expected her stand to become the catalyst for such sweeping change. The aftermath of her traffic stop had spread like ripples on a pond, stirring conversations across Silverwood and sparking a dialogue that reached beyond the town's borders. As her story circulated, local news stations, social media, and community forums became filled with people's own stories of injustice and mistreatment, exposing the side of Silverwood that many had ignored or simply never noticed. For the first time, citizens began questioning the very systems that had long gone unquestioned. For Kara, the momentum of the movement had been overwhelming but empowering. She was invited to join a committee led by the town's community leaders, tasked with overseeing and expanding the initiatives set in motion by her complaint. They called it the Silverwood Initiative for Justice and Transparency, SIGT, an effort to foster accountability and mutual respect between law enforcement and the community. The committee meetings were intense, held in a small town hall conference room where city officials, police representatives, and community members gathered to voice concerns and propose changes. Kara quickly became a central figure in these discussions, representing not only her own experience, but the voices of those who had felt silence for so long. Each meeting challenged her as people poured their anger, frustration, and hopes into discussions that stretched late into the evening. She felt a tremendous weight on her shoulders, but also a profound sense of purpose. The journey was far from easy, but the possibility of real change fueled her determination. One evening, after a particularly heated meeting, where several residents shared emotional stories of being unjustly treated by the police, Kara stayed behind to gather her thoughts. The stories she'd heard echoed in her mind, stirring memories of her own encounter with Officers Anders and Lawson. But she knew that Silverwood wasn't the only town facing these issues. This was a systemic problem that ran deep, and she was determined to play her part in exposing it. As she sat alone in the empty conference room, reviewing notes and reflecting on the evening's discussions, Chief Milligan approached her, a look of quiet contemplation on his face. He had been attending each meeting, sitting silently for the most part, listening to the community's grievances with an air of solemnity. "Kara," he greeted her softly, his voice breaking the silence. "Thank you for sticking with this. I can only imagine how exhausting it must be." Kara looked up, surprised by the chief's presence but appreciative of his support. "It's hard work, Chief, but it's necessary. People are finally feeling heard. That's worth all the exhaustion." Milligan nodded, his gaze steady. "I wanted you to know that I'm committed to making things right. I've seen things in this department that I've tried to ignore, thinking they were minor issues. But your story, it's made me realize that if we don't address these minor issues, they only grow into major injustices." His words held the weight of sincerity, and Kara sensed the struggle he was facing. She could see he was grappling with the realization that he hadn't done enough to hold his officers accountable, and that his own leadership had contributed to the culture of complacency within the department. "Change starts with admitting there's a problem, Chief," Kara replied. "If you're willing to make those hard decisions, to really push for change, then this community will support you." Milligan sighed, a weary expression crossing his face. "I'm willing, Kara, but I can't do it alone. I need people like you pushing alongside me. And honestly, I'm not sure where to start." Kara took a deep breath, sensing an opportunity to turn his words into action. The SIJT is a good start. But we need more than meetings and promises. We need regular oversight, community-led audits, and independent reviews of complaints. If people don't see real consequences for misconduct, they won't trust us. And without trust, there's no relationship to rebuild. Milligan nodded thoughtfully. I'll support it. We'll get the town council involved, and we'll look into getting an independent review board established. It's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but at this point, that's the least of my worries. They spent the next hour discussing the specifics, mapping out plans that could bring transparency and trust back into Silverwood's police force. By the time they left the building, Kara felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, she believed that the chief was genuinely committed to the cause, and she knew that if they could make this work in Silverwood, it could become a model for other communities. In the days that followed, the community's engagement with the SIJT grew stronger. Weekly town hall meetings were filled to capacity, with residents sharing their stories, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. Kara found herself speaking at each meeting, answering questions and helping to guide discussions on the various reforms being proposed. One evening, during a particularly crowded meeting, a young man named Jordan stood up to speak. He was visibly nervous, fidgeting with his sleeves as he glanced around the room. Kara watched him, recognizing the anxiety and vulnerability in his posture. She offered him a gentle nod of encouragement. "My name is Jordan," he began, his voice shaking slightly. I've lived here my whole life. I know most of you, but I don't know if any of you know what happened to me last year." The room fell silent, all eyes on him as he took a deep breath and continued. "Last year, I was walking home from my shift at the diner, and I got stopped by the police. I hadn't done anything wrong, but they treated me like I was some kind of criminal. They searched my backpack, made me empty my pockets in front of people. It was humiliating." His voice wavered, and Kara could see the pain etched into his face as he relived the memory. "I didn't report it. I thought no one would care, that they'd just say I was making a big deal out of nothing. But when I heard about what happened to Agent Thompson, it made me realize that I wasn't alone. That maybe, just maybe, things could change." Kara felt a lump rise in her throat, deeply moved by Jordan's courage. She knew how difficult it was to share such personal experiences, especially in a town where everyone knew each other. As Jordan took his seat, applause filled the room, echoing with solidarity and encouragement. Kara stood up, addressing the crowd with a voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Thank you, Jordan, for sharing your story," she said, looking directly at him. "This is exactly why we're here, to make sure that every voice, every experience is heard. This isn't just about one incident or one person. It's about creating a future where no one has to feel humiliated or silenced." The crowd's applause grew louder, a shared sense of purpose binding everyone together. That night, Kara realized that the movement had taken on a life of its own, becoming something much larger than her own experience. People were no longer just listening. They were demanding change, and they were ready to work for it. The following week, the Silverwood Initiative for Justice and Transparency held its first workshop for law enforcement and community members alike. The goal was to break down the walls of misunderstanding and foster empathy between officers and the people they served. Kara had been instrumental in organizing the event, working with local leaders and consultants to design activities that encourage open dialogue. The workshop began with a panel discussion where community members shared their stories of both positive and negative encounters with law enforcement. Officers, many of whom had never heard such personal stories, sat quietly, their expressions ranging from discomfort to empathy as they listened. For some, it was the first time they truly saw the impact of their actions, both good and bad, on the people they were sworn to protect. Kara felt a sense of satisfaction as she observed the exchange, knowing that these conversations were laying the foundation for a more understanding and just community. She could see the expressions of recognition on the faces of officers who, for the first time, began to view the people they served not as civilians or suspects, but as neighbors, each with their own stories and struggles. The final exercise of the workshop was a role-play activity where officers and community members switched places, reenacting various scenarios from each other's perspectives. Kara watched as Officer Daniels, a longtime Silverwood cop, played the role of a young man stopped for walking home late at night. His expressions of discomfort and frustration mirrored what Kara herself had felt during her encounter with Officers Anders and Lawson. She knew this experience would stay with him, shaping how he approached his duties in the future. As the day wrapped up, Chief Milligan took the stage, addressing both his officers and the citizens with a newfound respect in his voice. "We're not just officers and civilians," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We're neighbors. We're part of the same community. Today, I've seen the courage it takes to stand up, to share painful experiences, and to demand better from each other. I'm proud of each and every one of you for being here, for choosing to be part of the solution." Applause filled the room, an echo of shared commitment and determination. Kara watched with a quiet sense of pride, knowing that the journey was far from over, but that they had taken a monumental step forward. That night, as she left the community center and looked out over Silverwood's familiar streets, she felt a newfound connection to her town. The lights in the windows, the distant laughter from nearby homes, the hum of passing cars, all of it felt like a reminder that change was possible, even in the smallest of places, if people had the courage to stand together. Kara's heart swelled with gratitude, and a small smile played on her lips. She had set out to make a difference, and here, in her own hometown, she could finally see the beginning of that change. She knew there would be challenges ahead, resistance from some, and hard conversations yet to be had. But for the first time, she felt that justice was not just an abstract ideal. It was a reality they were building together, one story, one voice, and one step at a time. Resistance and resilience. The momentum of the Silverwood Initiative for Justice and Transparency, SIGT, was undeniable. Over the past weeks, Kara had seen her town unite in ways she hadn't thought possible, with citizens and law enforcement sitting together, talking openly about hard truths, and daring to envision a more just community. But as the initiative gained traction, so did a rising undercurrent of resistance. Not everyone in Silverwood welcomed these changes. Some viewed the movement as an attack on law enforcement, an attempt to disrupt the peace, or simply as unnecessary meddling in how things had always been. In town hall meetings, local forums, and even private gatherings, voices of dissent began to emerge. Some of the resistance was rooted in fear that exposing flaws within the police force would make the town more vulnerable, or that scrutinizing officers would discourage good people from joining the force. Other objections were based on deep-seated beliefs, individuals clinging to the idea that respect for law enforcement should be absolute, that questioning authority was a slippery slope. As these objections grew louder, Kara found herself facing scrutiny and criticism. Anonymous letters arrived at her office, accusing her of stirring trouble and undermining good officers who had risked their lives for the community. She was called an outsider, a disruptor, and, in one particularly stinging letter, a disgrace to the FBI. Online, comments ranged from supportive to scathing, with some accusing her of exaggerating her story for fame and others questioning her motives. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Kara sat alone in her office, scrolling through some of the online reactions. Most of the comments in support of her efforts were thoughtful and encouraging, but the negative ones cut deep, each one a reminder that not everyone wanted the change she was fighting for. Despite her resolve, the criticism wore on her. She was only human after all, and the personal attacks hit harder than she'd expected. The relentless resistance was a painful reminder that change, especially when it came to deeply ingrained systems and beliefs, was never easy. Kara's closest friends and colleagues noticed her struggle, though she tried to keep it hidden behind her composed demeanor. One evening, as Kara was about to leave her office, Special Agent John Delgado, her supervisor and longtime mentor, knocked on her door. "Kara, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. She looked up, surprised to see him at this hour. "Of course, sir," she replied, gesturing for him to sit down. Delgado took a seat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "I wanted to check in with you. I've noticed you've been a bit quieter lately, and I can't help but think this whole situation is starting to wear on you." Kara sighed, letting her guard down slightly. It's harder than I thought it would be, sir. I knew there'd be resistance, but I didn't expect it to feel this personal. It's one thing to fight for justice, but when people accuse you of undermining everything you stand for, it gets exhausting." Delgado nodded, his gaze empathetic. "I understand, Kara, and I know how dedicated you are to this work. But change, especially change like this, is bound to ruffle feathers. People resist what they don't understand, and sometimes it takes time for them to see the bigger picture." Kara appreciated his words, but a lingering doubt tugged at her. What if they're right? What if this just causes more division? "I wanted to make things better, but it feels like I'm tearing the community apart." Delgado's expression softened. "Kara, look at how far you've come. You've given people a voice, a platform to share their stories. You've encouraged law enforcement to examine their actions and strive to do better. Yes, there's resistance, but that doesn't mean you're not making a difference. It means that people are paying attention." Kara considered his words, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. "You're right," she said quietly. "I didn't start this to make friends. I started this to make change." "That's the spirit," Delgado replied with a small smile. "And remember, you're not alone in this. If you ever need support, don't hesitate to lean on those who believe in you." They shared a moment of quiet understanding, and Kara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was part of something much larger, a movement that, despite the opposition, was making a real impact. In the following days, Kara returned to her work with renewed energy. She focused on strengthening the SIGT's initiatives, planning additional workshops, organizing community-led audits, and working with Chief Milligan to implement oversight measures that held officers accountable while supporting those who truly served with integrity. But as the SIGT pushed forward, the resistance grew bolder. One morning, as she arrived at the community center for a meeting, Kara noticed a group of protesters gathered outside. They held signs that read, "Support our police," "No more interference," and "Stop vilifying law enforcement." The crowd was small but vocal, and their presence cast a tense atmosphere over the event. Some of the protesters shouted as she passed, their accusations sharp and accusatory. "You're turning this town against its own." One woman yelled, her voice laced with anger. "Our officers don't deserve this." Kara kept her head held high, refusing to let the taunts shake her. She knew that the people inside the community center were counting on her to be their voice, to stand firm even in the face of hostility. As she entered the building, she was greeted by community members who offered words of encouragement, their presence a reminder of the support that kept her grounded. Among them was Jordan, the young man who had shared his story at a previous town hall meeting. He approached her with a determined expression, his voice steady and resolute. "Don't let them get to you, Agent Thompson," he said. "We need you. We all do." Kara gave him a grateful smile, his words a balm to her weary spirit. "Thank you, Jordan. Your support means more than you know." The meeting proceeded as planned, with discussions focused on implementing transparency policies and building bridges between the community and law enforcement. Despite the noise outside, the room buzzed with hope and determination, the people inside committed to seeing the changes through, no matter how long it took. That evening, as Kara drove home, she reflected on the day's events. She was beginning to understand that resistance was a natural part of progress, but what mattered was how she responded to it, whether she allowed it to break her resolve or used it as fuel to keep going. As she approached her house, she noticed a figure standing near her front steps, partially hidden in the evening shadows. For a brief moment, a flash of concern crossed her mind. But as she pulled into her driveway, she recognized Chief Milligan. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Chief," Kara called out, stepping out of her car. "What brings you here?" Milligan turned to her, his gaze somber. "I wanted to talk to you in person, Kara. I heard about the protesters today, and I thought I'd come by to check on you." Kara was taken aback by the gesture. She had grown used to handling things on her own, especially since joining the bureau, but there was something comforting about the chief's presence. "Thank you, Chief," she said, her voice soft. "It's been a difficult day, but I'm holding up." They stood in silence for a moment, the evening air cool and still around them. Finally, Milligan spoke, his tone filled with quiet determination. "I want you to know that I'm in this with you, Kara. I faced my own doubts, my own fears about this process, but I believe that what you're doing is right. And if that means facing backlash, then so be it." Kara looked at him, touched by his words. "I appreciate that, Chief. This isn't just about me. It's about building something better for everyone." Milligan nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Exactly. And I have faith that we'll get there. It may take time, and it may not be easy, but I'm committed to this. We all are." As he turned to leave, Kara felt a newfound sense of unity. She wasn't just an agent fighting against a flawed system. She was part of a team, part of a community that, despite its struggles, was coming together to build something better. In the days that followed, the SIGT's initiatives continued to gain traction, despite the ongoing protests. The town council approved the establishment of an independent review board to oversee complaints against law enforcement, a historic move that had once seemed impossible. New training programs were implemented, focusing on de-escalation techniques, community engagement, and implicit bias. Kara received messages of support from unexpected places: neighbors, local businesses, even a few police officers who had once been wary of her efforts. Each message reminded her that for every voice of resistance, there were many others who believed in her mission. One evening, Kara attended a gathering at the community center, where citizens came together to celebrate the progress they had made. It was a small, informal event, filled with laughter, music, and a sense of hope that hadn't been felt in Silverwood for a long time. As Kara looked around the room, she felt a profound sense of pride. She had faced resistance, doubt, and even hostility, but she had also witnessed the power of resilience, of people coming together despite their differences to fight for something greater. That night, as she drove home, Kara realized that the true victory wasn't in the policies they'd passed or the reforms they'd implemented. It was in the spirit of unity and courage that had taken hold in her town. She knew there would be challenges ahead, that resistance would continue to rear its head, but she was ready. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that Silverwood was moving forward, one step at a time, toward a brighter future. And she would be there, every step of the way. A new foundation. Months had passed since Kara Thompson's fateful traffic stop set in motion a transformation within Silverwood. The Silverwood Initiative for Justice and Transparency, SIGT, had become more than just a committee. It was a force woven into the very fabric of the community. Kara watched as the seeds of change she had helped plant began to blossom, even in unexpected places. The Independent Review Board, established with the backing of the town council, had held its first hearing. The board was comprised of community members, legal professionals, and representatives from local law enforcement. It was the first of its kind in the area, and Kara knew that its very existence sent a powerful message. Accountability was no longer optional. It was a duty. The review board's purpose was simple but revolutionary for Silverwood. It provided a transparent forum for addressing complaints and concerns about police conduct, ensuring that citizens' voices would not only be heard, but also respected. Kara had been invited to attend the board's first session. The room was filled with residents and police officers alike, all curious about how this new process would unfold. The case that day was a minor one. a complaint about excessive force used during an arrest, but the implications were enormous. Both the officers and the residents in attendance understood that they were witnessing the dawn of a new era. By the end of the session, after hearing from both sides and deliberating respectfully, the board recommended additional training for the officer involved, along with a formal apology to the resident. It was a decision that, while small, represented a significant shift in how the town handled such issues. After the hearing, Kara lingered in the meeting room, watching as people dispersed, still buzzing with the energy of what they'd just witnessed. Chief Milligan approached her, his expression one of quiet pride. "We did it, Kara," he said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and accomplishment. "We actually did it." Kara nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "This is just the beginning, Chief. There's still so much work to be done. But today, we took a step in the right direction." They shared a moment of silent understanding, and Kara realized just how far they had both come since that day on Main Street. She had been ready to hold the department accountable, and now, standing beside her, was a man who had faced his own fears and doubts, ultimately choosing to be an agent of change. As the weeks rolled on, the changes brought by the SIGT continued to ripple through Silverwood. The department's new training programs were well underway, emphasizing not only technical skills, but also empathy and communication. Officers were learning to approach each situation not just as enforcers of the law, but as members of a community. This mindset shift wasn't easy, and there were still moments of friction, but the impact was undeniable. At the heart of these changes was Kara, who had become a symbol of resilience and integrity. She was invited to speak at schools, local organizations, and even other police departments, sharing Silverwood's story and offering guidance to those looking to implement similar reforms. At each event, she encountered people who had been inspired by her journey, students, activists, and officers alike who saw her as proof that one person's courage could truly make a difference. One evening, Kara attended a community event at Silverwood High School, where students had organized a day of dialogue to discuss the SIG's impact. The event was packed with parents, teachers, students, and residents of all ages. Kara took the stage, feeling the weight of the room's anticipation, and began speaking about her journey. From the initial injustice she'd faced to the hard-fought victories they had achieved as a community. Injustice thrives in silence, she told the audience, her voice steady yet filled with conviction. But change begins with a single voice, a single story. None of this would have been possible if people hadn't spoken up, if they hadn't come together. Silverwood has shown that when we confront our own flaws, when we acknowledge the need for growth, we become stronger. As she spoke, she noticed a group of students in the front row, their eyes wide with admiration. Among them was Jordan, the young man who had bravely shared his own experience during the early days of the initiative. He had since become a vocal advocate for justice in the community, working closely with the SIGT to ensure that Silverwood's youth felt empowered to stand up for themselves and others. After her speech, Kara stayed to chat with attendees, answering questions and listening to their thoughts. Jordan approached her with a shy smile, holding a small notebook filled with handwritten notes. "Agent Thompson," he began, his voice wavering slightly, "I just wanted to thank you again. I've learned so much from watching you, from seeing how you handle everything with so much courage." Kara felt a pang of pride as she looked at him. "Thank you, Jordan. But remember, courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means standing up, even when you are. And I've seen you do that more than once." Jordan's face brightened, his shoulders straightening as he took in her words. "I want to keep helping, to make sure this all lasts. People need to know that Silverwood has changed, that it's different now." Kara nodded, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're already making that happen, Jordan. Keep speaking up. Keep pushing forward. This is your community too, and you have the power to shape its future." As Silverwood continued to adapt to its new norms, Kara noticed another unexpected shift. Her relationship with the police department had transformed. Officers who had once been wary of her, who had perhaps even resented her role in sparking change, began to approach her with questions, seeking her insight and advice. One afternoon, Officer Daniels, a veteran cop who had initially resisted the SIG's initiatives, knocked on her office door. Kara looked up, surprised but welcoming him with a nod. "Agent Thompson," he began, his voice hesitant. I wanted to talk to you about something. It's been on my mind lately." "Of course, Officer Daniels," Kara replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. "What's on your mind?" Daniels took a deep breath, his gaze focused on his hands. "I won't lie. I was one of those officers who thought all this reform stuff was, well, unnecessary. I thought it was just more red tape, more ways to criticize us for doing our jobs. But after going through the new training sessions, after hearing the stories people shared, I realized I hadn't been looking at things the way I should have." Kara listened, her heart swelling with empathy. "I appreciate you saying that, Officer Daniels. Change is hard for everyone, especially when it means re-examining what we think we already know. But it's never too late to grow." Daniels nodded, his eyes reflecting a newfound humility. "I want to do better, Agent Thompson. I want to make sure that when I wear this badge, I'm truly serving the people of Silverwood. I thought I was before, but now I see there's more to it than just enforcing laws." They shared a moment of quiet understanding, and Kara felt a profound sense of hope. This was the real victory. The transformation that began in the hearts and minds of individuals willing to challenge their own beliefs, to push beyond their comfort zones in pursuit of something greater. Months turned into a year, and Silverwood continued to evolve. The SIGT became a permanent fixture in the town, with regular forums, workshops, and training sessions that brought together citizens and officers in ongoing dialogue. The Independent Review Board handled cases with transparency and fairness, creating a sense of accountability that resonated throughout the community. Kara continued her work with the FBI, taking on new cases and navigating the complexities of her career. But Silverwood always remained close to her heart. She had found a home there, a community that had embraced change with open arms, even when it wasn't easy. One evening, as she was leaving the office, she received a call from Chief Milligan. "Kara, I wanted to let you know that Jordan is organizing a youth outreach program. He's calling it Voices of Silverwood. It's aimed at helping young people learn about justice, empathy, and advocacy." Kara smiled, feeling the surge of pride. "That's incredible, Chief. Jordan's come a long way." "Yes, he has," Milligan replied, his tone filled with warmth. "And I think a lot of that is thanks to you. You've inspired a whole generation, Kara. Silverwood is a different place because of you." As she ended the call, Kara stood in the quiet evening, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink. She thought about the journey she had traveled, the challenges, the doubts, the resistance, and how, despite it all, she had found herself transformed along the way. Silverwood had become a symbol of hope, a beacon for other communities looking to make a difference. And Kara knew that while the journey was far from over, they had laid a strong foundation, one built on resilience, respect, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. As she walked to her car, Kara looked around at the town she had come to love. It was a place of both struggle and triumph, a place where people had learned to listen, to question, and to grow. And she knew that, no matter where her path took her, Silverwood would always be with her, a reminder that one voice, one story, could indeed change the world.